There is a stretch of the American coast where retirees are quietly living on $87,000 houses, while the rest of the country pays $1 million for a shack with mold. Nobody is talking about it, and the locals would prefer it stay that way. Today we are driving straight into the underbelly of the North Carolina coast, the towns nobody puts on the glossy retirement lists, the ones where a single Social Security check still pays the bills. 10 towns, all coastal, all real, all still cheap, for reasons that are sometimes charming and sometimes deeply, historically weird. We are talking about a town where the entire local museum is a phosphate pit full of fossilized shark teeth that you can just take home for free. A town whose mayor once walked 273 miles to Washington, D.C. to protest a hospital closure. A town that has flooded 4 times since Bill Clinton was president, and residents keep rebuilding anyway. And one waterfront town where a baseball Hall of Famer used to skip stones on the river before he threw a perfect game. Hit subscribe, or the ghost of Blackbeard, who lived on this coast, will personally haunt your Zillow searches for the rest of your natural life. Now let us count down from number 10. Before we start, one number to keep in your pocket. In 2026, the average retired worker's Social Security benefit is roughly $2,844 a month, according to the Social Security Administration's own June statistical snapshot. Half of all retirees get less than that. A couple both drawing near the average lands somewhere around $3,000 a month. That is the budget we are working with. And here's the part North Carolina does not put on billboards. The state does not tax Social Security income. At all. The flat income tax rate dropped to 3.99% for 2026, and seniors 65 and older with income under $38,800 can claim the homestead exclusion, which knocks off the greater of $25,000 or 50% of your home's appraised value. There is also a circuit breaker program that caps your annual property tax at 4% of your income. Those 2 programs alone quietly move North Carolina into the top tier for fixed income retirees, and almost nobody outside the state knows about them. Now the countdown. Number 10. Shallotte in Brunswick County. Shallotte is our warm-up town, the one on the borderline of what Social Security can carry, because we want to be honest with you from the very first entry. This is not a beach town in the strict sense. Shallotte sits about 10 miles inland from Holden Beach and Ocean Isle Beach, which makes it the hub where retirees who want beach access without beach prices do their grocery runs and pick up prescriptions. Population sits around 4,600 people. The waterway that runs through the middle of downtown is the Shallotte River, and the town has a small but real waterfront district with restaurants and a farmer's market. The catch, and it is a real one, is the housing math. Depending on which source you trust, the ACS puts median home value around $252,000, while Data USA has the town figure closer to $349,000. That is high. For a single Social Security check, buying a home here is a stretch unless you are looking at a mobile home or a fixer-upper. But rentals hover around $1,060 a month, which is workable for a couple. What makes Shallotte survive on this list is location. You are 20 minutes from the sand. You are 40 minutes from Wilmington's hospitals. And the property tax rate in Brunswick County is one of the lower ones on the coast. The deal breaker to watch is insurance. Brunswick County was ground zero for the January 2025 insurance settlement, when the Rate Bureau originally asked for a 99% homeowners increase in coastal counties, and the state insurance commissioner Mike Causey knocked it back to about 16% this year and another 15.9% next year. That is still real money. If you rent, Shallotte works. If you buy, run the insurance quote before you run the mortgage. Shallotte is the amuse-bouche. The real coastal weirdness starts now. Number 9. Columbia in Tyrrell County. Columbia has a population of about 750 people sitting on the Scuppernong River in the least populated county in North Carolina. There are fewer people in the entire county than there are seats in a mid-sized college football stadium. Median home value, depending on source, runs between $120,000 and $161,000. Median gross rent in Tyrrell County sits around $722 a month. If you are drawing a $2,000 Social Security check, the math actually breathes here. So what do you do in Columbia? You live next door to the Poquoson Lakes National Wildlife Refuge. That is 111,000 acres of swamp forest and Poquoson habitat, home to red wolves, black bears, tundra swans in winter, and enough migrating birds to make an Audubon Society member weep. The town has a wooden boardwalk that stretches into the swamp, and the Walter B. Jones Center for the Sounds sits right at the entrance. The real Columbia trade-off is isolation. This is deep eastern North Carolina, an hour to the nearest real hospital in Elizabeth City. And if you need specialty medical care, you are driving to Greenville or Norfolk, Virginia. There is one grocery store. Amazon takes a couple of days. Cell service is honest but not great. What you get in exchange is quiet. Genuine, dark sky, hear the frogs at night quiet. Retirees who move to Columbia and stay tend to be the sort who consider a Wednesday afternoon on the boardwalk with binoculars to be a full and satisfying life. If that is you, this coast still has a spot at your price point. If you break out in hives without a target within 20 miles, keep scrolling. And speaking of scrolling, if you have made it this far without hitting the like button, the algorithm assumes you hate small towns and will punish us both. Fix that now and let us get to the fossils. Number 8. Aurora in Beaufort County. Population 455 people according to the 2020 census. Median home value roughly $87,000. That is not a typo. This is one of the cheapest genuine towns anywhere on the American East Coast, and it earns its place on this list through pure oddity. Aurora sits on the south side of the Pamlico River in Beaufort County, and its main tourist attraction, and I use that word very loosely, is the Aurora Fossil Museum. Admission is free. The museum grew up around the Nutrien phosphate mine right next door, formerly the PCS phosphate mine, formerly the Texas Gulf mine, which has been digging up marine sediments from the Pungo River Formation for over 60 years. All that dredged material gets piled up outside the museum in what locals call the fossil pit, or the pit of the Pungo, and visitors are allowed to walk in with a bucket and take home whatever they find. What you find is fossilized megalodon shark teeth from a time when the entire eastern North Carolina coastal plain was underwater. Real megalodon teeth, the size of your hand. Free. Every May, the town hosts the Aurora Fossil Festival, and the population briefly quintuples as paleontology nerds, homeschool families, and hobbyist collectors descend on the town for a long weekend of digging, trading, and eating fried food out of paper baskets. The phosphate mine itself is one of the largest of its kind in the world, and it exists in Aurora because the seabed here, tens of millions of years ago, was rich enough in marine life that the fossilized remains eventually became commercial-grade fertilizer. The mine is still active. The trucks still rumble through town, and the museum staff will happily explain the geology to you at a pace that assumes you have all afternoon because in Aurora, you do. The rest of the year, it is you, the river, and a very small collection of neighbors. There is almost nothing else here. One diner, one post office. Groceries are a drive. Healthcare is a serious drive. But if your retirement dream involves buying a small house outright for the price of a used pickup truck and spending your afternoons digging up prehistoric shark teeth like a very slow, very content archaeologist, Aurora is one of the only places in America where that math still works. It also happens to be one of the last places on this coast where you could genuinely buy a home free and clear with a lump sum and still have money in the bank. Number 7. Windsor in Bertie County. Population 3,269. Median home value about $102,700. Median gross rent around $812. On paper, Windsor is a dream. A historic downtown with brick storefronts, the Cashy River winding through, canoe access to some of the most unspoiled blackwater cypress swamp in the eastern United States, and something called the Roanoke River Partners Platform Camping System, which is essentially a series of screened-in wooden platforms built out over the water, where you can pay a small fee to sleep with the herons. Some of the platforms are only reachable by paddle. You bring your gear in a canoe, you tie off at the platform, you cook dinner on a small stove, and you fall asleep to the sound of the swamp breathing around you. Retirees who like a little adventure in their week have been quietly using this system for years, and it is one of the great underrated experiences on the East Coast. The town has a genuine lived-in charm. And then there is the water problem. Windsor has flooded by careful documented count at least 4 times since Hurricane Floyd in 1999. Tropical Storm Julia in 2016. Hurricane Matthew later that same year when the Cashy River rose to 17 feet, roughly double flood stage, and damaged about 60 homes. Hurricane Florence in 2018, and a couple of smaller events since. The town keeps rebuilding. Some retirees have made peace with it by buying on higher ground north and west of downtown, and by carrying serious flood insurance under the National Flood Insurance Program. But if you are house hunting in Windsor, this is the single most important question you can ask. Where does this property sit on the FEMA flood map? Not sort of near a flood zone. Exactly which zone? Because if the answer includes the letters A or V, your insurance premium is going to eat a very large slice of that Social Security check. Buy smart, buy high, and Windsor is a genuinely lovely, genuinely affordable Inner Banks town. Buy on the water, and you are auditioning to be a cautionary tale in the next hurricane documentary. Fair warning delivered. Moving on. Number 6. Plymouth in Washington County. Plymouth sits right at the western end of the Albemarle Sound, at the mouth of the Roanoke River, and it has one of the wildest median home value figures on this entire list. Depending on the source, Data USA puts it at $87,000, City Data has it closer to $100,000, and Zillow's home value index lands around $98,400. Median gross rent is about $819 a month. Population sits around 3,250 and has been declining for about 2 decades. That decline is Plymouth's whole story. The town used to run on a massive paper mill economy, and when that industry contracted, the population and the tax base contracted with it. Poverty in town runs around 30%. Downtown has empty storefronts. This is not a glossy retirement postcard. What Plymouth has, and what makes it genuinely fascinating, is history. This is the site of the Battle of Plymouth in 1864, one of the largest Civil War engagements fought in North Carolina, and the battle involved a Confederate ironclad ram called the CSS Albemarle that briefly seized control of the Roanoke River before Union forces sank it. The Port of Plymouth Museum sits downtown with a full-scale replica of the Albemarle in the parking lot, and the story of that ironclad is one of the strangest chapters in the entire Civil War. The ship was built up a swampy tributary by a farmer with almost no shipbuilding experience, launched into the Roanoke and used to briefly break the Union blockade of eastern North Carolina. She was eventually sunk by a Union lieutenant named William Cushing, who piloted a small steam launch carrying a spar torpedo right up to the Albemarle at night, detonated it against her hull, and somehow swam away in the confusion. Cushing got the Medal of Honor. The Albemarle got raised, refurbished, and eventually scrapped in Norfolk. The story is stranger than fiction, and it happened right here. The town is also the birthplace of Medal of Honor recipient Jacqueline Harold Lucas, who at 17 years old jumped on 2 grenades at Iwo Jima and somehow survived. The history is genuinely rich, the living costs are genuinely low. A retiree on Social Security can buy outright here and have a paid-off house with money to spare. The trade-offs are real: poverty, limited jobs for family members who might move with you, a hollowed-out downtown, and the Roanoke River flood risk you already know to check. Plymouth is not for everyone, but if you want a piece of American history for the price of a modest car, this coast has almost nowhere else that competes. Number 5. Hertford in Perkins County. Now we start climbing into the good stuff. Hertford is where the affordability math starts to overlap with actual quality of life. Population around 1,618. Median home value $176,500, according to the ACS 2024 estimate, which is below the county figure of $231,700. So you are buying below the county median in a genuinely pretty town on the Perkins River. And the town has a signature. Downtown Hartford is home to a swing bridge shaped like the letter S, one of only a handful of S-shaped swing bridges left in the country, and it has been rotating open for river traffic since 1928. Locals will tell you tourists slow down on the causeway just to photograph it. The town is also the birthplace of Baseball Hall of Famer Jim Catfish Hunter, who won 5 World Series titles, threw a perfect game in 1968, became the first $1 million-a-year player in baseball history, and by all accounts spent his boyhood skipping stones on the same river you can walk to from downtown. He got the nickname Catfish from Oakland A's owner Charlie Finley, who decided a country boy needed a country nickname to sell tickets. Hunter came home to Hartford after his career, hunted, farmed, and eventually died of ALS in 1999 at just 53 years old. He is buried in the town cemetery. There is a statue. The high school field is named for him. And per local lore, the song Carolina Moon was written on this river. though we hedge that one because folklore is folklore. The deal breakers in Hartford are milder than the towns we have covered so far. Poverty is around 25%, which is high but not catastrophic. Local jobs are thin, so most working-age residents commute about 37 minutes, most commonly to Elizabeth City, which sits about 16 miles away and is where you go for real shopping, real healthcare, and real airport access. For a retiree, that commute is somebody else's problem. What you get is a quiet, historic downtown, a walkable waterfront, a river with an S-shaped bridge, and property tax bills that, after the senior homestead exclusion, look almost embarrassingly small. This is the point in the list where you should probably subscribe, because we are getting into the towns where the pitch actually starts to sound too good to be true, and we have not even fact-checked the pirate stuff yet. Number 4. Belhaven in Beaufort County. Belhaven markets itself as the gateway to the Inner Banks, and it is a legitimately charming little town of about 1,400 people, sitting where the Pungo River meets the Pantego Creek. Median home value, depending on source, runs anywhere from $103,000 to $187,500, depending on whether you trust Data USA or zipcodes.com's ACS poll. Median rent hovers around $900 to $1,057. The waterfront is genuinely beautiful. The downtown has a historic hotel and a memorial museum stuffed with the kind of eccentric artifacts that only exist in small-town collections that were built by one obsessive local resident. That was Miss Eva Blount Way, who spent decades collecting everything from Civil War buttons to a two-headed pig, and the museum is exactly the sort of unhinged American gem the country used to be full of. Belhaven should be in the top 3 on this list, but there is a very serious catch, and we have to be honest about it. On July 1st, 2014, Vidant Pungo Hospital in Belhaven closed. The building was demolished by December 2016. That closure left roughly 23,000 residents of Hyde and eastern Beaufort counties without a nearby emergency room. The mayor at the time, Adam O'Neill, walked 273 miles from Belhaven to Washington, D.C. in protest. That walk started in mid-July 2014, in the North Carolina summer heat, on rural roads that were not built for a middle-aged man carrying a homemade sign about hospital access. He kept a blog. He gave interviews. National media picked up the story. The hospital did not reopen. A local woman named Portia Gibbs died waiting for a medevac helicopter after the closure, and her name comes up every time the town has a public meeting about healthcare access, which is often. Today, the nearest hospitals are ECU Health Beaufort in Washington, North Carolina, and Carolina East in New Bern, both cited variously as 30 to 60 miles away, depending on which part of Belhaven you live in and what the traffic looks like. For a healthy retiree with a reliable car and a plan for emergencies, Belhaven can work. For anyone with a serious ongoing health condition, this is the single most important variable in the entire cost equation. The town's poverty rate hovers around 40%. Hurricane Florence hit here hard in 2018, and still some retirees make it work, drawn by the waterfront, the low cost, and the sense of being somewhere the outside world has genuinely forgotten. Belhaven is real. Just go in with your eyes open. And a very good insurance card. Number 3. Elizabeth City in Pasquotank County. Elizabeth City is the compromise pick, and I mean that as a compliment. Population sits around 18,500 people, which makes it the only entry on this list that qualifies as an actual small city. It has a hospital, Centera Albemarle Medical Center. It has a university, Elizabeth City State University. It has a Coast Guard base. It has real grocery stores, a Walmart, restaurants, a functioning airport connection, and a historic downtown on the Pasquotank River with brick sidewalks and independent bookstores. The nickname is the Harbor of Hospitality, and the town backs it up with something almost nowhere else in America still offers, which is free 48-hour dockage for visiting boaters at Mariner's Wharf. You can sail in, tie up, and stay 2 nights on the city's dime. The Coast Guard base here is the largest in the country, which means the town has a steady rhythm of active-duty families and retirees who chose to stay after their tour ended. That gives Elizabeth City something most of the tiny Inner Banks towns lack, which is a genuinely diverse population that includes younger families, working professionals, and retirees all in the same downtown coffee shops. Median home value, depending on source, runs from $187,700, per Data USA up to 223,000, 400 per zip codes.com's ACS poll. Redfin has recent sales closer to 261,900, so buying is at the upper edge of what a single Social Security check can carry. But median gross rent sits around $1,146 to $1,217 a month, which for a couple pulling $3,000 between them is entirely workable. What you gain by picking Elizabeth City over the tiny towns further south is amenities and healthcare access. What you give up is the deep silence, the fossil pits, and the sense of being genuinely alone with the herons. Crime here is meaningfully higher than in the villages, though nothing catastrophic, and the town is working through it. But if you want a real coastal North Carolina retirement with a hospital across town, a downtown to walk to, and neighbors who will notice if your mail piles up, Elizabeth City is quietly one of the best-kept secrets on this entire list. And unlike the tiny hamlets, you can still order dinner after 8 p.m. Number 2. Washington on the Pamlico. This is where the tease from the top of the video pays off, and it pays off in unexpected ways. Washington, North Carolina, known locally as Little Washington to distinguish it from the other one, has the historical distinction of being the first city in the United States named for George Washington. That naming happened in 1776, before George Washington was even president, before there was a United States of America to speak of. The town was founded by a Colonel James Bonner, who laid it out on his own land and named it for the general leading the Continental Army, which was either patriotism or extremely shrewd real estate marketing, depending on your read of history. The city has since sent soldiers to every major American war, seen its downtown burned twice, and rebuilt each time with the kind of stubborn small-town pride that makes a place feel like it truly belongs to the people. Who stayed? Population sits around 9,700. The town runs along the north bank of the Pamlico River, and the waterfront is genuinely one of the most photogenic in eastern North Carolina, with a boardwalk, a marina, and the North Carolina Estuarium Museum right at the river's edge. What makes Washington land at number 2 is the balance. The town has a hospital, ECU Health Beaufort, right in town. Median household income in Washington sits around $41,723, which tells you the cost base is genuinely modest, even if recent Redfin sales have crept up to around $285,000. Median ACS home values are meaningfully lower than that recent sales figure, which is a great signal for a retiree willing to hunt for older housing stock away from the immediate riverfront. Downtown has restaurants, art galleries, a farmer's market, and a genuinely walkable historic district. And the surrounding countryside is farmland and swamp, and river bends and enough undeveloped landscape to make you feel like you have finally gotten somewhere. The deal breakers here are the ones you already know. Hurricane Florence caused significant flooding along the Pamlico in 2018. Coastal insurance is rising, and the same senior property tax reliefs that make North Carolina so friendly to retirees have to be actively applied for at the county assessor's office by June 1st each year, meaning if you move here, you have paperwork to file. But if you want a coastal North Carolina retirement with real amenities, real history, a real hospital, and a Social Security check that still feels like enough, Washington is legitimately hard to beat, which makes it the perfect setup for number 1. Number 1. New Bern in Craven County. Population 32,700. And every single number in that sentence is a warning sign for this list, because New Bern is the largest and most amenity-rich town we are recommending. And largest and most amenity-rich usually means priced out. It does not quite, not yet. Median home value, depending on source, runs from $240,100 per Data USA up to $299,400 per City Data. Median gross rent sits around $1,760 to $1,105. For a single retiree buying, that is at the very top of the Social Security ceiling. For a couple renting, it is a genuinely comfortable number. And what you get for that number is remarkable. New Bern is the second oldest town in North Carolina, founded in 1710 by Swiss and German settlers who named it for the city of Bern back home, complete with a bear on the town seal. There are bronze bear statues scattered all over downtown. Tryon Palace sits at the south end of the historic district, a full reconstruction of the colonial governor's mansion with formal gardens, costumed interpreters, and a research library that draws historians from all over the country. The original palace burned in 1798. The reconstruction opened in 1959 using the original architect's plans. And in 1898, a New Bern pharmacist named Caleb Bradham mixed up a soda fountain drink he called Brad's Drink, which he later renamed Pepsi Cola, allegedly because he thought it helped with dyspepsia, which is a very old word for indigestion. The original pharmacy is still there. You can buy a Pepsi in the building where Pepsi was invented. The gift shop leans hard into the branding, and the whole thing is a tiny, delightful piece of unlikely American history. The town has a regional hospital, Carolina East Medical Center, a real downtown, real restaurants, waterfront on both the Neuse and the Trent Rivers, and a retiree community that is large enough that there are actual clubs and organizations to join. The catch, and there is always a catch on this coast, is that Hurricane Florence hit New Bern with a 10.41-foot storm surge in 2018 and damaged over 4,300 homes. The town has rebuilt, but flood zones are flood zones, and buying below the surge line is buying trouble. The other catch is the price ceiling. If home values keep climbing at their current pace, New Bern will price itself off this kind of list within a few years. Right now, for a couple with 2 Social Security checks, it is still the best all-around coastal north. Carolina retirement town in the state. Big enough to have everything. Small enough to still feel like a town. Old enough to have real history. And cheap enough for one more moment in time that the Social Security math still works. So there is your countdown. 10 coastal North Carolina towns where a retiree can still live on Social Security alone, ranked from the borderline pick at Shallotte all the way up to New Bern. Before we close, one honest budget snapshot for a single retiree in one of these towns, assuming the house is paid off or nearly so. Property tax after the homestead exclusion on a modestly valued home runs about $60 to $90 a month. Homeowners and flood insurance in a coastal zone runs $250 to $450 a month, and that number is the single biggest variable on this list. Utilities in older southern housing stock run $250 to $350. Groceries for one, $300 to $400. Medicare Part B and a supplement plus medications, $300 to $450. A car with fuel and insurance, because none of these towns are walkable, $250 to $350. Phone and internet, another $100 to $150. Add it up and you land somewhere between $1,500 and $2,200 a month. A $2,000 Social Security check is tight but workable. 2 checks for a couple is genuinely comfortable. That is the math. If you take one thing away from all of this, let it be that the North Carolina coast is not one place. The Outer Banks Tourism Board would like you to think Duck and Corolla and Nag's Head are the whole story. They are not. The Inner Banks, the Sound Country, the Tobacco and Cypress River towns that never got the postcard treatment are where the real affordable coast still lives. Buy above the floodline. File your homestead exclusion paperwork by June 1st. Price the insurance before the mortgage. And remember that the same isolation that makes these towns affordable is also the same isolation that makes them beautiful. If this video helped, hit the like button so the algorithm feeds it to more people staring at their Social Security statements and wondering if the coast is still possible. Subscribe so you catch the next one, because next week we are going deep on the Gulf Coast towns doing the exact same thing. Drop a comment with the town on this list you would actually move to, because the comment section on these videos is where the real research happens, and current residents almost always show up to correct me, confirm the numbers, and tell stories the census data cannot capture. Now go price a small house in Aurora. The megalodon teeth are still quietly waiting,